Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the evidence you've provided so far. Mr. Bourne, the submission by the Climate Council of Australia argues the $17 billion a year in gas export tax revenue, which could fund 1.3 million household solar and battery installations or 560,000 electric vehicles. Now, in my home state of Western Australia, we've got the highest rooftop solar uptake in the world. But as mentioned earlier, renters, low-income households and regional communities are still being left behind. How could that revenue specifically transform energy affordability for West Australians, but also Australians in general who are currently most exposed to the volatile gas prices that we're seeing and, who can't really afford to insulate themselves with winter around the corner?
Yes, thank you, Senator Payman. I'm a Fremantle boy myself, so know Western Australia extremely well, obviously. Look, I think
the Dockers.
You're dead right, dead right. Look, I really do think that the key there is first getting the revenue, but then targeting of that revenue is clearly a government's responsibility. And just as we've been seeing with regard to diesel, should it be rationed towards farmers? Should it be rationed towards rural areas? It's clearly a government's job to look at the societal equity at a particular time. I would say there are two parts of that societal equity. There's one which is in the absolute present, where the pain is being felt, and how do you alleviate that pain? And that is clearly a government's role to think through that. But the second one is how do we think about this strategically? What is it we do in which particular, I'd say Western Australia, which particular region of Western Australia, the north of which is going to be suffering a lot from climate change, and the south of which is going to be suffering a lot from drought as we go forward. So that strategic thinking is also a government responsibility. So there's the short and the long. I can't decide that, but I know that you can help it.
Thank you, Mr. Bourne. And quickly, just to Dr. Bant, we've spoken extensively about PRT, and obviously your submission recommends that deduction rules be urgently tightened. Now, based on what you've seen over the last 3 decades, what specific safeguards do you think would need to be built into a 25% export tax to make sure that industry can't do what it's done to the PRT?
I think one of the advantages of a flat 25% tax on export is that it's much more difficult to game. Obviously, the question of deductions needs to be looked at because that's been one of the huge flaws in the PRT and the ability to bank huge amounts of credits in a way that the tax was never originally designed to do but turned out to operate that way. But that is something that needs to be addressed. I'll ask my colleague to add anything further to that, but can I just echo one of your sentiments? Go the Dockers, but they shouldn't be sponsored by Woodside. I grew up watching the Benson and Hedges World Series cricket, and I was a kid being advertised to by a tobacco corporation as I was watching sports. The same thing is now happening in Western Australia. These kids are running out as part of the nippers into an ocean that products from corporations like Woodside is going to acidify and heat. And just as we've seen, just as it's been understood that tobacco is a product that, when used as intended, is toxic and will kill, so it is the case, I think, that gas and coal are the next asbestos and tobacco, and over time people will look back on the Woodside sponsorship of the Dockers and the nippers and shake their heads and consign it to the dustbin of history in the same way that we did with Benson and Hedges.
Thank you, Adam. So, Senator, perhaps not as exciting as what Adam just said, but To talk through the deductions in a little bit more detail, the first thing that we want to emphasise is that a shift away from the PRRT shouldn't just be a substituting of names. It should really be a shift from a taxation system designed around taxing super profits, which is what the PRRT is about, to a system that is much more squarely designed to actually collect a clear, defined royalty value. At the end of the day, Australian gas is a publicly owned resource, and the Australian public is entitled to a portion of the value of that resource as it is extracted. So that shift away already will help define things more clearly, and we see that in other regimes. So in places like Canada, the United States, legacy royalty regimes with the North West Shelf, there's provisions for value at the wellhead as a way of calculating value. That helps limit the amount of gaming of the system from the get-go. But the other point that we would make is that some current PRRT settings are overly generous. They allow significant deductions to be carried forwards from previous years, but also to claim future deductions, including future decommissioning costs, for example. Some of the other challenges are around expected accelerated depreciation or generous uplift rates. So we do think that as part of this inquiry, and this is one of the recommendations we've made, is that in addition to looking at the headline tax rate or changes to the PRRT, in doing so, if the inquiry does recommend repeal, we also urge the inquiry to consider how we can learn from historical examples, the PRRT, the lessons that we can draw from that regime, and ensure that any new deduction regime is much tighter and is much better calibrated to reduce and limit gaming of the system by major gas corporations.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.